Hello, hello. Hey, Julie.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you everybody for watching. You know, if you've been here before, I like to jump straight into the first question without any introductions at all. But in this case, because Julie is a product managing expert, and that's a topic where I think it's quite interesting to understand how you get into this kind of internal product management space. So I do kind of want to start and understand a little bit about your journey, your story, and how you kind of made that transition into kind of technical product management, internal product management, and what that has kind of entailed for you.
Yeah. So I started in big tech, and that's where the majority of my career was, where it was really standard product management. And then I took a role in retail tech, and it was described to me as this cool thing called platform engineering, where it really was a technical program manager overseeing all the mobile app development. And then you're also the product owner for this thing called platform engineering. And this was 2022. So as we know, it's evolved a lot since then. So Google was not very helpful. There is little content on what does that even mean? What does platform engineering mean? What does it mean to manage it as a product? Do you even need one of those? So what I didn't know was that I was actually hired to prove the value of platform engineering with leadership who had a foot out the door. Basically, they saw it as a cost center. And so it took a minute to, you know, get to know it myself, build that conviction, and then try to figure out how do I value proposition this. And that was a journey in and of itself. So went from retail tech to fintech. And so now I'm over in London, and it's a very different beast in and of itself with all the considerations from one industry to the next.
I'm curious about diving just straight into some more detail on that. First, did you prove the value? Uh,
Yes, I did, and that's something I think is a whole other podcast that I would love to speak about it,
we need
developing
a
a model.
Nice. So then, I mean, maybe to then go more into, I psyched you out a little bit by going one and then just stopping and waiting for you to reply. Now here for the two parter.
Whatever the format is, Sam,
Yes.
we're riffing.
We're riffing. So the second part I want to understand is how did you even approach that journey, the value point? Because when we survey platform engineers, platform leaders, particularly more new platform leaders, that really their biggest thing that they struggle with is proving value.
Right.
And it's often not because there is no value there, and they have value things that they're saying or they think are really important, but they have no idea why it's not registering or how to actually prove it. So I'm curious what you did in that case and what kind of your advice would be for proving value.
Sure. So starting this journey outside of big tech was a lot more difficult, where I think the intrinsic value is understood by us, right? But as a business, you need to put it in dollars. They didn't care about the developer satisfaction improving and all of these things. So at a at big tech, you have all the metrics. You can prove that out. And you also don't need to prove it out because they're very well bought in and they own cloud. So that's a little bit helpful. Um, but for me to kind of understand what the value was, communicating it by way of the work we're doing, the value that's seen by way of X, Y, and Z. That wasn't enough. So at the end of it, realized they just need dollars. So how do we present that in dollars and build something that can tangibly prove as best as we can, directionally relevant numbers. And so my principal architect and I put together a model that looked at productivity, at performance, and resilience. And so the ways that we plugged in different models was we took the average cost of a developer per hour. And we said, okay, if our test parallelization improves speed by X, every hour. What does that equate to in a year? And we put all of these different areas that we were tangibly making those improvements because, you can tell leaders, we saved an hour. Okay, cool. But if you can say, we saved over a year's time $700,000, right? That's a bit more important. And we came to finally make the mic drop statement of just by having a platform engineering team, before we get into any of the work we're doing, you're saving $12.4 million a year just by us existing. Now, let me add on to that. And really, we were able to get to like 37 million or something. So it was, they stopped asking why or why not to fund us. And that conversion from being a cost center to cost savings, I think was something very different.
Well, because as you were talking, my next question was going to be, how did you present the information? And I guess all you had to do is just put 37 million on one slide and then done.
No, I actually walked them through our tool and
Hmm.
plugged in different things because unlike, so we call it product math, I think, for uh, standard product management outside of big tech, where it's like, we're going to reduce this and this font is going to drive $5 million. And it's
Yeah.
like, sure, sure, sure. But I wanted to make sure that it was based on something tangible
Yeah.
and something we could stand by and, very proud of the work. I can't take all the credit. It was very much a joint effort, but the salesmanship was all me. So,
Hmm. No, awesome. I mean, these are the types of stories that I think are so important for a lot of people in this space to hear. And it's especially when we see, we've just done our state of platform engineering report,
ooh,
and
as a
overwhelmingly people are struggling with really talking about the value that they're proving, managing different stakeholders, how to communicate the stuff, the internal selling, the internal marketing. And it's why this role of the product manager is so important. Like, you have that in your blood. That's the first place you think about, and you're like, this person, I can understand the language that they speak. Let's speak in that language. You know, for years, the mantra was, oh, we should just get all the platform engineers in the team to get a product mindset. You, we
I
just
have many thoughts on this. Yes.
well, I can thankfully affirm for you that the tide is churning. No one will be saying that so much within the next 6 months. 2 years ago, people would say, "Oh, you don't need a platform product manager. Doesn't matter." Um, which obviously I think you knew was nonsense. I knew was nonsense. Now we have the data to prove it. And in the recent state of platform engineering report, about 30% of teams have a platform product manager focused on their internal product, which is up
Wow.
from 3% when we surveyed 2 years ago. So
So
it's
you see how hard it was for me to find content on this? Now I get to write it, but
yes.
the thing I was most struck by at PlatformCon when you were in London was Luca's talk about the biggest miss that teams have, and that being a product manager. And I was so interested in that, and I could tell I was in the vast minority of the attendees by way of what I brought to platform engineering. And then I think in the roundtable, it became even more clear where people were talking about, well, where do you find that talent? And I think one of the biggest problems is looking in the wrong places. And, you know, product management is not something you just pick up. That's like saying, okay, go code in React Native now. Thank you. Are you done? Yeah, just read a few things. So it's almost like asking an engineer to just business pitch, right? They don't want to, first of all. And it's an art. And for me personally, I have learned by failing. Most of what I've learned is by failing. But what it brings is business, right? Half of the job is the tech, is the translation. And I'm the overly simplified explanation. What does a product manager do? You're a translator. You go to the engineering teams, you understand what should I prioritize? And there's always going to be that dissonance. The tech wants this, the business wants that. So you really need to bridge that, not only to the business to explain why doing a multi-region AWS uh, enabling that is important, and leaders say, no, 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 until it goes down. right? And then it's like, I no longer have to justify this anymore. But it's really understanding deeply what resonates with leaders and how to get things approved. And I'll go back to this because I think it's important, is that money talks. And that's just the reality that we're in. Um, but I was really interested in that not only is the problem clear now, but there wasn't much being done about it. And the more I spoke with people, their approach has been, well, can't we just take a tech lead? And, you know, they're talking in business meetings. I'm sure they can talk about this. And, you know, can you? Yeah, you sure can. But you're not optimizing, right? You're just seeing if that works. So I think I'm glad to hear that it's emerging. I am shocked to hear uh, that it's only at 30%. I would be curious to understand where that sits. Is it in certain industries? Is it a cost problem or is it just misaligned approaches to what matters by way of it? And if your problem is evangelization, having a technical explanation for that is not going to resonate with the people funding it.
Well, I can read for you because I've just pulled up the exact chart because I'd be curious to, from your perspective, some of the finding here. And I think that the headline thing that really stuck out to me was how much this has changed so fast. But
Yeah.
part of that kind of makes sense. It's been a dialogue for a while. It's been my go-to question every research interview I've done. Every time I talk to an enterprise, I talk about, do you have a platform product manager? Yes, no, yes. Okay. How many do you have? How do you structure them? How do you, and I've seen that kind of changing over time. And what we see, the kind of the interesting thing in here. So, like I said,
Sorry, is my
there,
lighting? Oh, I feel like it just cleared up a bit. We're doing it live.
we're doing it live. So when we ask people, how does your team ensure a platform as a product mindset? So 15% said these were the kind of the star organizations. We have PPMs and each engineer has a product mindset. So that's kind of the ambition. You've got the engineers thinking about product, but you have dedicated PPMs who really know their stuff and can drive it. And then there was about 38%. We have no PPMs, but each engineer has a product mindset, and I would be suspicious of that. It seems to be people in the old model. Then it was 21%. We have dedicated product managers, and then 1/4 we don't have a product mindset at all.
Well,
And
that would be the obvious, or that's the honest answer,
those are the
because
honest ones, exactly.
and there should be a lot more in there, because saying a product mindset, what does that even mean?
What does it mean?
We
That's
gave
yeah.
him a book of product management for
Mm,
dummies, and hey, you're smart people, figure it out. Product management is not executing at all. And that is every single team that I've come into jumps to execution.
mm.
And that's where we fail. Product management takes you to step back. Okay. So we're just trying to ship, ship, ship. What's the problem that we're solving for? Why does it matter? Who is it for? Right? We need to get the strategy in place, because otherwise we are throwing things at a wall thinking it's a solution, but we haven't even isolated what the problem is.
Uh,
So, yes, in if you're going by the resume details and what you're looking for, having an on paper product mindset, what does that even mean?
mm.
And I would really challenge that. And just so that I understand and I'm answering you appropriately, how do you define enterprise? And in the context of how we're speaking about it?
Yeah, and that's a good question. I mean, it's one of these wonderful terms in our industry, which is basically meaningless.
No.
What what
Yeah. I'm a big fan of, like, making sure that we have, and this is
Mm,
another big part of product management, is a shared
a
language,
shared
right?
language. What are the
It's
key terms that we're using, and are we using the same terms?
right.
Because, and maybe it might be different organization by organization or industry by industry, the shared as much as possible. But that is really one of the key things I often do when I'm having this conversation. And someone tells me, "Oh yeah, I'm a product manager or I'm a platform engineer." And I'm like, "Okay, what is that? What do you do? What does that mean?
Right.
How do you define this? How do you define product mindset in your team?" And when you're talking about some of these things, what does that actually mean? And I would be curious how you help drive that within your own organization. Of
Yeah.
course, industry wide is a tougher battle. That's the battle, we're trying to resolve now. But within your own organization, how do you make sure everybody, from all the way above to all the way below, has the same definition of platform engineer, even, but also has the same vision and understanding of what you're even doing and what you're thinking about?
Yeah, I think, first of all, it's interesting how this conversation's kinda come full circle by way of people don't understand it. How do you define it more tangibly? And it's interesting, and I thank and blame Amazon for making me think about those finer things of, if you're gonna make a statement, have data to support that, or conviction, where does that come from? So I was thinking of enterprise, the way that I think it's defined, just kind of what's a SMB and what's enterprise is, I think it's like 10,000 employees or more, or something like that. It might be, again, contextually that's different. And so my question was really, is an enterprise company something because someone says it is? And do you have a product mindset because you say you do? And these are things that can't be proven or disproven by data. So that's where I think I'm making facial expressions that I can't control my face. It's really upsetting. People know where they stand in meetings. It's Yeah, I agree. Uh, Sorry, coming back to the question you're asking, which remind me, but it's later here in London. I trail off at the end of the day. I think it
To
was,
I think my question was, how do you kind of measure and ensure and drive a shared language within your organization on the platform engineering discipline?
yeah, and I think it begins with any time there's a broad term, is seeking to understand and asking that question. When you say friction, or when you say a blocker, this is another big thing to discern is we're blocked by, right? Because dependency management is a big thing. It's even bigger in platform engineering because the dependencies on all the feature teams that you support, which is vast in the space that I'm in, you are trying to first understand, well, what do you mean by that? And that's not what the other person means. So when we say test stability, are we talking about qualitative, quantitative? And why do you have a different opinion than you? We're in a controls environment. We need to be very clear on this. So I try to state what that means, right? So uh, using those kind of blanket terms, there are some things that need to be clearly defined. Is we were successful. How? How did you measure that? And that's part of that uh, strategy building, right? It's not only what do we need to do, who needs to do it, and by when. It's who is this valuable for? What and for who, and for how long, right? And making sure that you're communicating that in such a way that, well, how do we measure whether it's successful or not? How do we know that we should keep going? And then how do we know which battles to fight, right? Because another big part. So a product mindset is very different from product in practice, where yes, the tech is there. Yes, the things on the resume are there, but there's a lot of trade-off discussions that have to happen. And I try to keep my team as in the loop as possible because I want to explain, here's the roadmap we want. I wish we could get to these things. I think they're very important. However, bridging that gap between business priorities, we're shifting all the time, and a platform roadmap is very different from a feature-based roadmap, right? So I think it's a delicate balance, but I also try to have unique names for things when it makes sense. So for instance, I would say 30 plus more percent of each quarter, my team is firefighting. And we called it unplanned work until we decided that that sounds like we're not prepared. So retitled it to urgent care, right? What are the things that we need to stop what we're doing because developers are blocked, and this is something that needs immediate attention. And again, 30% of every quarter I have to buffer that in. So it's an evolving model, but platform as a product for me is now a tangible method of a roadmap that is both evergreen and also project based, with a lot of, oh, sorry, forgot to tell you about this. And didn't you deliver this? Oh, we forgot to include you on the 6 months of meetings we've been having. But where is it?
Urgent care is genius. I love that.
It
That's
it
a
was,
perfect way to approach it.
and
I'm
that's where
curious.
it's like feel like people readily understand what that is. And then I separate that from standard operations, which
Yeah.
is your quarterly upgrades and all of those things.
So I'm curious on the road mapping question. So that's, I mean, we asked in the survey, like, as a platform team, if you could get external help on something, what would be the number one thing for that? And the number one thing was road mapping. It seems like it's something that people struggle with. I'm curious if you have a best practice, or you have your own model, or you have something where you're like, this is how I do it.
Yeah, sorry, I giggled just because I was like, but their product mindset should
Yeah,
really
yeah, but they have a so this is
should really enable them to do that.
this is
Again,
the
going
fun
back.
thing in the data. Whenever you compare different answers with each other, you're like, you're liars.
Or they don't understand that a product mindset, again, whatever it is that that means, is enough. And maybe that's just because, hey, we don't have funding, we have to live with this, so let's be positive about it. But do you really not think that that's needed? And I don't know how to roadmap. Well, there's a whole job family who is, and that's back to that strategy. It's not what it's a pragmatic method to back into a roadmap is what the end result is of a strategy, whether that's for a given deliverable or a team's roadmap. And so where it is very different from standard road mapping and how my platform as a product approach, because you can't get away from organizational things like quarterly planning, which grinds my gears, and I'm a big agile fan. But if that's something that the organization does, how do you fit into that? Because people don't care that you're a different team. They want you to present as a product manager in the same way as the feature teams where the structure is built for. So I broke out our epics by quarter, and we would just have Q1, Q2 for those evergreen things like our urgent care, like our standard operations, like our app release velocity, right? These are things that we're always going to be working on. And then we have our new architecture, right? And we have that. And the things that are a bit more time boxed, we can scope those out. And that's how I do it is quarterly. It would be, we're going to complete, honestly, discovery in this quarter. And our output is going to be building a roadmap. There's so much we don't understand about this. So that's where we start instead of, well, let's just start coding and see what happens. No, no, no. And that's what a developer does, and they get frustrated with me a lot because I ask a ton of questions, which I think is also a key feature that is super important for product managers is not only just being curious to ask the questions, but seeking to understand. And the way that I also prioritize that roadmap. So there's building out the items, defining them, saying the value, but then there's stack ranking, right? Not everything makes the cut. And more often than not, something's going to miss out on the cut as the quarter goes on. And so I think building out that model is just as difficult because you need to factor in, well, what does the business care about? And then tie all of that back to, okay, here's the priority, and they'll challenge it a lot. And it's trying my best to kind of explain those, but I know they're still mad at me right now for some of the things that, are really outside of, and we know it's right. And that's what's hard is I think on the tech side, and again, straddling both worlds, we try to do the right thing for the tech, the right thing for the organization, the industry, right? And that doesn't always speak in terms of dollars or pounds, rather. And so I think it's a delicate balance, but it starts with a skill set and experience. And I think neglecting to acknowledge that a immeasurable product mindset is enough is a mistake.
When you're talking about, we know that we're doing the right thing, I think that comes from a place of your kind of built-in confidence, years of experience. You have a strong sense of what you're doing. I would imagine many of the people listening are like, I have no idea if I'm doing the right thing or what is the right thing. So I'd love to know, like, how do you build that confidence within the organization that this thing that you're doing on the roadmap is the right thing?
So when I say the right thing, I'm speaking more on the tech side, where
Yes.
we know that this will be better for our systems. We know that this is going to take longer to implement. It's going to be far more expensive, not just in CapEx, but in OpEx. But we do believe it's the optimal solution. And then you go to leadership and they're like, well, this one's cheaper, like help us and this is going to take 6 months. No, we need it actually 6 months ago. So there's all of that. And it's hard to go back to the tech team and, explain because I know it's the right thing to go for. Right. And these different solutions, and I'm shocked by the way. And once I was like interviewing in London, and maybe it's just a Europe thing, but how many organizations, big ones, are not in the cloud. So it's almost like, how long do you think a cloud migration takes? Oh, okay. All right. So I think that there's a lot of things that are difficult to explain to one camp or another. So I'll take the example on the business side of explaining the AWS multi-region support, where, okay, well, we're fine. And the question asked was, what was the impact of the last outage? And I'm like, we both know you're not paying to archive that data. So that's not going to be something, I even went to Google and I was like, how much did it cost this company? Uh, wasn't there. And again, trying to quarter over quarter, because I knew it was the right thing to do for our infrastructure, for our available services, because if it goes down, we're the perfect scapegoat to blame for that, right? But it's, again, when it went down just for an hour or two, that's all it took. Thank you, US West 2, for allowing us to prove that point because I was going to be forced to deprioritize it. We were almost there. And so we landed the ship, but it was hard.
That's super interesting, and I think it's a challenge that a lot of these new kind of internal product managers might have to be approaching. They have a new kind of stakeholder, and some of these more different kinds of stakeholder relationships than they might be used to. When we see that data and this data platform engineering, this massive explosion in the number of platform product managers, I'm sure many of those are experienced product managers who are switching over to the internal side. Some may be new product managers coming into the field. I'm curious what your advice might be to some of these people who are now having to think about a new way of thinking about product management and what they should kind of think about, what they should be wary of, um, kind of going into this new frontier for them.
Yeah, good question. And I think I want to take a step back and say it was, I think, one of the biggest difficulties in transitioning from, and this is what we call them now, so I feel bad, but widget building, standard features, to platform product management is the level and depth of technical uh, acumen. So not technical expertise, and this is where I think there's a lot of thinking, even internally in the roles that I've been in terms of let's bring a technical person because you need to understand the technical complexities. It would be really good to bring an engineer, and we used to call them purple squirrels, people that could speak to the business and sell it and also code it. So, find your purple squirrels, but let's be realists. And my advice would be similar to my own position that I, again, didn't know I was getting thrown into is learn, that technical acumen, that business acumen, and that hunger to seek to understand. One example of how I make sure that I'm understanding is I just have my engineers talk to me about what they're doing. And I ask a ton of questions. And at the end, I repeat it back to them and I just say, "Have I understood?" Or, I'm like, I'm translating to business speak right now. And so I relay it back, not necessarily in technical terms, but taking those and explaining it in such a way that a non-technical person can digest it. And, there might be corrections in there, but I'm also very curious. I'm very wanting to understand. So it's not enough to have your developers tell you something that you read verbatim. You need to want to understand. And that's where the technical product manager piece comes in is again, I'm not of the mindset that you need to code to be able to do this job. I am of the mindset that you need to ask the right questions and keep asking until you get the answers to build your conviction. And that's ultimately, as a product manager, if you don't believe in something, you're not going to sell it to anyone else.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Julie. This has been a real pleasure.